Okay, so we are live. I am just going to chat for a few minutes as people filter in. So do the normal thing and let us know if you are here, where you're from, what you'd like to chat about today. We're going to be talking a little bit about self-care here in a little bit. So drop in, put your name in there, let us know where you're from. So I'm just going to fill this time with a little bit of yabbering. We're talking about, let's share some of the projects I'm going to be working on coming up. So you see that table right there? That is my sewing table. And I am working on a project to put a cutting mat on the whole top, make it a little bit bigger so that my cutting surface at the end will be 5 foot by 8 foot, so I can lay an entire piece of cloth out flat. So I'm really looking forward to that. There may be a purchase of a circular saw or maybe a brad nailer as part of this, maybe perhaps, because a girl loves her power tools. Good morning, Mary. I'm looking out the window and probably seeing the same kind of weather you are. Good morning, Barbara. It's great to see you here. Oh, I hope the weather is good down in Arizona. Good morning, Karen, from Sweden. I love tatting. I tatted up some trim for my wedding back in the early 1980s, and I haven't really done it since then, but boy, I sure love the finished product of that tatted lace. Let's see, I'm just kind of nattering for just a couple more minutes before we get started, so that folks can come online. Good morning, Kirsten. Welcome today. We are going to be talking a little bit about self-care and how we do this as sewists. So my mug today is one of the designs that I made based on 12th and 13th century ceramic tiles in English churches that I was selling a few years ago. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So let's do this thing. So hello, my lovelies. We hear a lot about self-care, but what does that really mean? I mean, companies are happy to sell us products that they claim is self-care, but is lighting a candle and taking a warm bath really what self-care is all about? Hi, if you're new here, my name is Althea. I'm here to talk all about sewing, having ADHD, and all things history bounding, vintage clothing, historical clothing, so that you can creatively thrive through the art of sewing. Today we're going to have a conversation about self-care. And I'm going to be consulting my notes a little bit more today because I want to make sure I get my information right. So let's start by kind of establishing what self-care means. And the World Health Organization has a definition of self-care, and that's the ability of individuals, families, and communities to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, and cope with illness and disability with or without the support of a healthcare provider. Boy, the coughing is starting early today. And so what does that mean? That sounds a little bit different than what we're used to seeing as self-care. But this means health literacy, which means, just knowing what's going on with your body and how best to take care of it. It's mental. Excuse me, folks. I used to be able to talk for hours and hours before the pandemic. These days, boy, it's a little bit more difficult to talk for any amount of time. So let's get back into that. It starts with health literacy, and that's really knowing what's going on in your healthcare with your own body. It's having, working towards mental well-being. It is getting therapy if you need it, talking to friends if that's what you need. It's physical activity, within the bounds of what you are able to do. It is making sure that you're getting up and you're moving. It's healthy eating. It's risk avoidance or mitigation, not smoking, not drinking too much, not skydiving. Well, skydiving, I guess, could be healthcare or self care for some people. It's also good hygiene. It means, washing your hands regularly, brushing your teeth, those kinds of things. And also, the rational use of products, services, and diagnoses. And that just means being aware of any kind of dangers that the stuff that you are using has. So that's a great big, that's a great big definition from the World Health Organization. And I just want to really emphasize that self care is not just about indulging yourself in luxury products like lighting a candle, putting in some lovely smelling bath salts, and putting on some nice music and just reading a book in the bathtub until the water gets cold. That's a type of self care, but self care really goes much deeper than that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what self care is for creatives and, the importance of having it. And we tend to sometimes put so much pressure on ourselves to complete projects, to making sure that we're doing all of the things so that we're constantly producing. And one of the first things that we may want to think about when it comes to self care is to just really step back and give ourselves grace. And if that means that it takes longer to do projects, um, that's okay. That's a part of self care, in that we're not putting extra pressure on ourselves because the world gives us enough stress as it is already. So we don't want to be adding to that stress if we can at all help it. So one of the first things that we want to think about is, when you're sewing, when you're sitting at the sewing table, making sure that it's ergonomically set up, making sure that your cutting table is the right height for your body, making sure that you have a good chair. Um, I have a tendency to really like vintage sewing chairs, but they're sometimes not the best ergonomically. So I tend to use a computer chair when I'm sewing because I could be there for a really long time. And I want to make sure that, I'm not putting a lot of pressure on my back, that I'm sitting correctly. I remember looking in vintage magazines or sewing books from the past, and I saw one diagram of a woman sitting at her sewing table, and they were showing proper posture. And of course, she has her feet flat on the floor. She's got her elbows, at the 90-degree angle, and so everything was set up for her to not put extra stresses on your body while you're doing the sewing. And so we want to be able to, give our bodies what it needs to be comfortable and safe while we're actually doing our sewing or whatever really creative endeavor you are currently doing at this time. Another one is to take regular breaks. Raise your hand if you've ever been sewing and then 2 hours later, 2 hours later, you realize that you haven't stood up, you haven't gotten any water, you haven't moved around, you're just focused on what you're doing. And being in that flow state is awesome for production, but we also have to realize that sometimes we just have to, stand up, move around, do some stretching. I keep a yoga mat, in my sewing studio so that if I have been sewing a long time, I can just put out my mat and take 10, 15 minutes and do a real quick stretch session, so that I can get back to sewing and, my body's loose and limber and I'm not worried about back pain because when you get to my age, back pain is a real thing. So, making sure that you're taking breaks and setting up your workstation properly. Another thing to do is to look at it as, making sure that you're setting realistic expectations. Uh, I am guilty of this. In how we sometimes say that our stomachs are bigger than our eyes, and we heap our plates up, and then we realize we can't finish what we put on their plate. And this is why me going to a buffet is not really a good idea. But it's the same thing with our sewing, isn't it? Sometimes we just put so much sewing on our plate, or knitting, or crocheting, or quilting, or whatever creative endeavor it is that you're doing. We just put too much on our plates. And so what we want to do is making sure that we're not putting too much on. And one thing that's really helped me is just kind of taking a step back and cutting back on the amount of sewing that I try to do, um, because when I'm like in the throes of projecting, you know, I know that I feel more stress, and especially if I'm sewing for somebody else. There's that time pressure, there's that commitment to another human being that you're going to make something pretty for them. So there's a lot of stress that we're putting on ourselves. So I've really cut back on the amount of sewing that I'm doing, trying to create, and just kind of give myself some grace and some space in my calendar because downtime and fallow time is also just as important for maintaining our creativity and making sure that that well doesn't run dry. Another thing that you can do is to connect with others in your sewing community. I mean, you're doing that right now by watching my live stream. I do have a Facebook group, and I'll link down below in the description where you can join up. But there are a gazillion places that you can go online to find like minded folks, whether your jam is quilting or knitting or crocheting or tatting. And you can find other people on Facebook. There's Discord. You can find them on Twitter. There's all kinds of places online that you can find, or join up with a local in real life sewing group. I would be really surprised if there is not a quilting circle in your area. There's probably through your local fabric store or sewing machine stores. A lot of times they offer classes. So taking classes with other human beings is really important, especially after the last few years. We were isolated from each other. And I know that for a lot of people, it's been very difficult to get back into being around other human beings. And so this is something that we kind of need to do for our mental health. Even introverts like myself need to have some in real life contact with other human beings. I can't just stay home with my cat and my husband all the time. So find ways to connect with your sewing community. Folks can comment in the comment section and let us know how they've connected with others in the sewing community. If you have a local reenactors group around you, that's another way to connect with humans through creativity. Let's see, what's the next one? Okay, so this is another one where, raise your hand if you have been sewing along. You look up from the sewing machine and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And you realize you have to get up in a few hours to go to work. We need to really make sure that in order to get our best creativity, we have to be as healthy as possible. And part of that is, making sure that you get enough rest. I am not 20 years old where I can't sit, I can no longer sit and just sew for 8 hours straight. I know that I have maybe an hour or two in me. And that's just something that, I've kind of learned about myself, that that's about as much time as I can sit and concentrate and be actually productive, before I start having to use the seam ripper a lot more than I really like to. So making sure that you take rest periods, learn what your limitations are, and how far you can go before needing rest, and then maybe cut back a little bit more and have a little bit more rest. And then, of course, the importance of sleep, because sleep is probably one of the key foundations to good health. And I know that a lot of times creatives sometimes have a difficult time sleeping well. Insomnia or other things keep us up. We wake up in the middle of the night with a great idea and we can't get back to sleep. But, doing what you can to find really good sleep and get rest, even if it's, taking a break from your sewing, taking a cat nap, and then grabbing your adult beverage of choice, and then getting back to your sewing. Speaking of which, it's ginger tea today. And then I'm just going to kind of finish on the notion of just being kind to yourself. We oftentimes put such huge burdens on ourselves. I mean, we are really our own worst enemy when it comes to that. And I'm no different. I have a pile of ideas of things I want to make, but I know that given a full-time job, I do have a partner that I like and I like to spend time with. I have a cat that I like and I like to spend time with. But that leaves maybe 1 or 2 hours on a work night that's just kind of mine. And so we just kind of have to acknowledge that we can't always do all the things at the same time, and we have to learn how to prioritize ourselves so that when we are present with others, we can really be present with them. Practicing mindfulness or meditation. I did a affirmation video, and I'll link that down below, and you can check it out, and let me know if that's something that you would like to see more of. I have kind of an idea for a snarky affirmation video, so let me know if that's something you might want to see. And part of this is also avoiding negative self-talk. We can get into these cycles of if something doesn't go right in a project, that is one of the leading causes of people abandoning a project. A mistake is made or something doesn't go right, and because we impose such strict limits on ourselves, and we hold ourselves to perfectionist standards, that can cause us to just abandon a project. And so when we abandon a project, we kind of get into a cycle of, man, I spent so much money and time on it already. You kind of start beating yourself up. And we just have to acknowledge that sometimes projects aren't finished. Sometimes mistakes are made. It can be useful if you make a mistake and you're finding yourself just wanting to chuck the whole project. Just put it aside for a while and go do something else. Go gardening, go take a walk, go play with the cat, go play with the partner. Do something to take yourself out of your head and away from the problem in your sewing, that's causing the issue. And then on the sort of the opposite side, you want to make sure that you're celebrating accomplishments. When you finish a project and you get to wear it, that's amazing. It's sometimes really awesome to share that out on Facebook or Instagram, and just kind of celebrate your completion of a project. Go take videos of yourself wearing it around. You don't have to show them to anyone, but in 10, 15 years, those are kind of awesome videos to look back on. And one of my regrets is that I haven't been better at, filming and recording and capturing images of the projects that I've made over the years. And, I'm kind of sad that I don't have that record. So when you do accomplish something, celebrate it and record it so that in, 10, 15 years, when you might need encouragement, you can kind of look back on this long history of accomplishments. And so that's kind of what I have for today. I didn't want to go super long. Some of these live streams tend to be super long, but I wanted to open it up for questions, and just kind of recap what we were talking about. Taking regular breaks, setting realistic expectations so that you're not putting extra burdens on yourself. I mean, we go to our creativity to find sort of a refuge. So we want to make sure that it stays a refuge and not becomes a source of anxiety or stress or, all of that mental turmoil that we can so easily create in our own minds. Connect with others in the community. Chat in the comments below. Let's have a conversation about this because, we're a community here in this live stream. We've got Facebook groups. We've got, other places that you can do this in real life too. Making sure that you are prioritizing your health, getting rest, getting sleep, eating healthy, staying as active as you possibly can, because you want to be able to bring your whole attention and your whole self to whatever creative endeavors that you're doing. And then just kind of on the last note, just be kind to yourself. We're all in this handbasket together, and we need to give ourselves grace. So if you have enjoyed this video, I invite you to subscribe and like it. I've made that affirmation video. I will link to it right here, and YouTube is going to think that you're going to like another video, which I will put in the end card. I've also added some inspirational posters over on my Ko-fi page that you can print out, frame up, and put where you can see them all the time so that you can just constantly have that reminder in your workspace that you are a beautiful creative soul and that you do awesome things. So let me know if you have any questions, if there's anything that you do that you find is super helpful. Share them down in the comments below. So I'll give folks just a few seconds to post to the comments before I close out. Oh, I'm so sorry about your migraines. Those are so hard to deal with. And yeah, Kathleen, that's, a really good point that sometimes your body just tells you you need to have rest. And, just sort of embrace that. If your body's telling you to have rest, go into it with rest. Make that warm beverage, get on the couch, get your soft, your favorite socks on, and watch something that you've wanted to watch for a while, or read a book, or just do small handcrafts. Listen to your bodies and listen to what your minds are telling you, unless there's no self-talk. No negative self-talk. So thank you, everyone. Like I said, if you want to check out that affirmation video, it's going to be right here. And YouTube thinks you're going to like this video here. And so until next time, get vaxxed, stay safe, and I bid you joy.